way that I define deep specialization, which is number one, you need to have focus on a specific vertical market, which means ultimately saying no to business that is not in that vertical market. That's number one. Number two, you have to have a strategy, which is a massive action plan that gives you a distinctive advantage. And then number three is you need to give a damn. We talked about that briefly, but you really need to have that empathy for the vertical market that you're targeting. And it's the combination, sort of the blending of all three, the focus, the strategy, and the empathy that allows you to really build that agency that has an enduring business model behind it.
So 20 million to 150 million. Is that right?
That is correct, Greg.
My friends, I want you to meet Corey Quinn, the author of Anyone, Not Everyone, a phenomenal book. And it's all about the proven system to escape founder-led sales. And Corey's going to take us through his playbook, which is going to be highlights of the book. The link to get the book will be in the description. 20 million to 150. That's obviously a pretty big feat for an agency, especially for someone that was, you said, the first hire inside of an organization. So I think there's a lot most agencies and service providers can learn from this conversation. But before we dive into the tactical, what allowed you to do 20 to 150 and how is that applicable for other agencies that might not be at that level yet? Corey, what's your background? How did you get to this company, Scorpion, where you had the opportunity to increase the revenues like that?
Awesome, Greg. Well, first off, thanks for having me on. I'm super excited to be here. So yeah, I guess the most relevant history that I can share is today I have 17 years in the agency space, and I started off, I had graduated from business school, got an MBA, and I came into my first job out of B school was at a digital marketing agency that was doing enterprise level PPC and SEO or SEM that we called it back then. My job was as a sales guy. I would go in and sell enterprise deals. And the way the agency was set up, it was founded by a CEO. Our CEO and founder was an ex-graduate of Harvard Business School. And if you're from the United States, you probably have heard that HBS or Harvard Business School has a fantastic social network. And this CEO had leveraged this network to get us a lot of really amazing deals with big brands like Lululemon and Remax and Hyundai and so on and so forth. And so we really subsisted at that time off of this CEO founder's network. And that's how we grew the agency. My next agency that I went to was founded by the ex-CEO of MySpace. And if you're familiar with MySpace, the old, social network 1.0, that business was effectively, generated revenue through advertisers. So as the ex-CEO of MySpace, he had direct line to all the big advertisers. Well, now, as a CEO of an agency, guess what he did? He actually leveraged all those relationships and brought them in. And me on the sales team, I was a sales leader at that point. We would take these amazingly warm leads and go in and close them. By the time I had been in this role and the other role, a total of, let's call it, 7 or 8 years in the agency space, that's how I believed how agencies grew. You had a charismatic, well-connected CEO who would leverage his network, and that's just how it worked. And it wasn't until I was hired at Scorpion as their first chief marketing officer. I was their first hire dedicated to growing the agency. Previous to that, there was employees in the company, but everyone was focused on serving clients. No one was actually focused on getting more clients for this agency. And what I found when I went there was obviously they'd grown to 20 million, mostly on this specialization. So what I got when I arrived there was a 6-person sales team, and on the sales floor, the phone would ring with an attorney who was calling in because they saw a Scorpion client website somewhere, and they would the salesperson would close them on the first call for a year commitment, many thousands of dollars. And of course, the salesperson would hang up the phone. There was a big metallic gong on the floor and there'd be high fives all around. The thing was, back then, it was all about the one call close. And the funny thing is, the thing that stood out to me was this attorney, because it was a specialization in attorneys, and Scorpion had built a brand name for themselves in that world. That attorney who was calling in didn't know who the founder was, didn't care. All they cared about was, do you understand how to help me get more cases from the internet? And the positioning and the sales conversation was all around attorneys and how we solve that as an expert, as a specialist in their world. And that's what allowed them to fuel this growth without the founder directly being involved in sales.
So you obviously mentioned specialization there, and that story of the person who hopped on and they didn't know who the founder was, and your eyes seemed kind of like opened to a different way at that stage. Like that seemed like kind of a turning point. And so the book leans heavily into, at least so far, that as far as I'm through it, on this concept of deep specialization and vertical specialization. And I know that on this channel, I've talked about specialization a lot. And as I read your book, like I'm just nodding my head. I'm like, I say that, but I feel like you say it way better. And I know that, like, I'm just kind of curious, and if you get this too, and where this kind of happened, like, I don't know why we think this way, but like so many agencies that I come across to this day still seem terrified of going deep and specializing on, say, just attorneys like you guys were doing. And they think it's very prohibitive. Can we hop in like right there? Like you see these two different companies that you've been at. One didn't require the founder and they've had a focus. The others sound like really just leverage the network. Any intel on like why you've seen agencies hesitant to focus like this? Yeah,
I think not in every case, but in many cases, agency founders get into business by just saying yes a lot, right? They're eager to grow a business and not have to go get a job. And so as a result of that desire and that vision and focus, that requires them in many cases just get into business and to build the client list. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. However, what happens is once you get to a certain size, saying yes to everyone begins to work against you. And that's really where they begin to consider the idea of specialization.
And I will say that I feel like I've heard the term vertical specialization. And obviously we talked earlier about specialization, but like for the people that there's some nuance to how you define both deep and vertical specialization. So just so that for the rest of the conversation, we're on the same page, like how do you define these terms?
Well, in broad strokes, there's two ways you can specialize an agency. You can specialize in what you do, i.e., SEO or social content, whatever that is, or you can specialize in who you serve. It might be dentists, it may be manufacturers, it may be SaaS businesses. And the way I think about it is it's kind of on a continuum where if you look at the specialization in what you do, you could be a generalist digital marketing agency or company that does everything from websites to logos to SEO to lead gen and affiliate marketing, and kind of be a one-stop shop. Jack of all trades on the one end of the continuum. On the other end of the continuum, you could be very, very specialized in the thing that you do. Maybe it's TikTok videos. Could be an example of a very specialized agency. And it is a continuum because you can sort of find yourself somewhere between the two of them. You don't have to just be at either end of the continuum. And most agencies find themselves somewhere in that continuum. When it comes to who you serve, it could be, on the one end is a generalist who works with any small business. Let's say it's locally focused. You work with the local pool cleaner and the dentist and the hairstylist and whatever that is. And you kind of work with anybody on the one end of the continuum. And on the other end of the continuum, maybe you say you only work with cosmetic dentists, as an example. And again, most agencies will find themselves somewhere in this continuum. The argument that I make is the more specific that you can get along this continuum of who are you specializing in serving, the greater your ability to differentiate and specialize and really build an expertise and a reputation that is spreadable more easily than if you were just a generalist.
Totally. And so when you got to Scorpion, they were already specialized?
I'd say about 70% of the business was concentrated in personal injury attorneys and mostly criminal defense attorneys. Yeah.
Got it. And so back to that kind of story where the one call closed, they didn't know who the founder, what happened from there? Like, obviously, like you said, if they were concentrated there and then you see this happen, and this is, I'm guessing, sounds a little foreign to you from your previous experiences, how did that drive the next steps and what, you were responsible for since you were leading the growth?
Yeah. So the first thing we did is just to kind of set the context a little more. So Scorpion, as an attorney client of Scorpion, you get a brand new website. And because because we had, 800 clients who were attorneys, they had 800 websites that were SEO optimized. And so those were in many cases the growth engine of the agency. And it continued forward. Like that was a great source of leads and whatnot. However,
yeah, that story of just like the logo and the bottom, like and they click through it. That's amazing.
And it is extremely profitable because the people who are paying you are the ones who are advertising for you in a certain way. And, Scorpion also had the benefit of being early. They launched in 2001. I joined in 2015. So they had this great sort of engine. I was actually brought in from the outside. The founder started the business by hiring all of his high school buddies, as a kid. And they kind of grew it organically and it had somewhat flatlined, which is why it was the case for me to come in, some people from the outside who weren't part of that founding story to get the company to the next level. And so the things that we had to do were a couple of things. Number one, we had to formalize inbound. We couldn't just rely on the natural inbounds coming in from the links at the bottom of the client websites. And so we had to do things around, generate content marketing plans and doing gated content and webinars and that whole sort of motion around creating very vertical specific content that would drive MQLs and early leads. But the thing that was transformative was we built an outbound sales and marketing motion. Now, the challenge, of course, and maybe some of the listeners may be familiar with this, when you have an inbound only sales team, getting them to pick up the phone and start to do cold calls is very, very difficult. And we did a lot of different things, but one of the things that really helped us to accelerate this transformation of inbound only to inbound and outbound is that we would send a gift to the prospect ahead of the cold call. And the example I like to give is we would send cookies. So the context there is that we were targeting attorneys. Attorneys, if anyone is listening who targets attorneys, knows this very well. They have a professional working at the law firm whose job is to prevent people from Scorpion and any other agency getting access to the attorney. They're like the professional gatekeepers. And these attorneys get a lot of, solicitation for business. And so what we learned very quickly was that cold calling them was not a high yield activity. And so instead, what we would do is we would send cookies to the partner, the law firm partner. And by the way, these aren't just, any kind of run of the mill cookies. These are amazing, mouth-watering, delicious cookies, like remarkable, experiential, like you have to sit down or hold something as you're eating this, that type of thing. And so we would put it into a FedEx box. And of course, FedEx would skip the mailroom and go right to the partner's desk. They would get opened and then the cookies would end up in the break room. Okay. And everyone in the law firm were enjoying these amazing cookies and everyone's saying, well, who brought the cookies? And the word Scorpion would end up buzzing around the office. And by the time the salesperson called to follow up, the resistance went from, the attorney's not available to, you're the one that sent the cookies. Hold on, let me put you through. Right. And so it had a transformative effect in two things. Number one, it gave the salesperson who had a lot of reluctance to do cold calling something to follow up on. It wasn't just a pure phone cold call, as well as it warmed up the lead so that they were more open to a conversation than just, not having any kind of context for the phone call.
So I feel like people will hear like the cookie story and be like, oh, like that's obviously a brilliant way to get in so that they respond to you. But my mind immediately went to, well, while that was probably expensive to send FedEx cookies, it would have been impossibly expensive if you didn't have deep specialization. One, because you'd be sending cookies to any and everybody, which is not going to be effective. And then two, because of, and you said it earlier, because you guys specialize in this market, you really knew and understood their problems so that when you finally got through, you could actually be speaking on their level, which again, if you were that generalist and you were like, hey, I'm going to go talk to attorneys and these other types of lawyers, and whatever, with the same outbound strategy, it might not work nearly as well without the specialization component.
Correct. 1,000%. That's 100% the point, which is that we knew that as a result of the specialization that we'd already studied our buyer. We knew them extremely well. And this particular situation is that attorneys are not necessarily trained to do marketing and they're not as sophisticated generally speaking, not as sophisticated in growing their business. Well, through this specialization, we understood in many cases really well how to grow a law firm because we had been doing it over and over and over for years for the same audience. And the way that that manifests is on the sales call itself, we would ask questions that were beyond the scope of straight lead gen or SEO. We would talk to them about, well, what happens when the phone rings? We're going to send you some great leads. What happens then? And what's your intake process? And, what's the value of this case to you? And we'd be able to bring market research and relevant information about, well, we know that in your area that, attorneys typically charge $5,000 for a DUI case. What are you charging? Right. So it would transform the whole experience of getting on a sales call that allowed us to do things potentially expensive. You could argue it's expensive. I would argue it's not. Things like sending cookies because we just needed the phone call. Like we had everything all set up. We just needed to get on those calls.
Yeah, I meant expensive in that like if you were just blanket sending cookies to any potential person, that might not turn into a valuable investment and be more of an expense than an investment.
Yeah. Because we know there's the stat out there that says, buyers are 80% of the way through the buying process by the time they talk to a salesperson. But you have to have, collateral that provides evidence that we are specialists and we are experts in solving their specific problem, not a generic version of their problem.
Yeah. So, man, there's so many things that we can cover on this. Like one thing that I found really interesting in your book was the process to pick a vertical market. And you talked about looking at the total addressable market. And I think the number was something like, as long as there were more than 2,000 of those businesses, like, it's probably not too small. Cause like, I think some people would ask like, well, can it be too small? I've always heard the answer, not really. And then yours is actually, well, yeah, 2,000. So can you talk about maybe how to pick and how to know if it's large enough for your goals? Cause you had a good story in there about that.
Sure. Well, I think, when it comes to the size, if you target an audience or let's say an industry or a vertical that is very large, let's call it medical. I was just having this discussion with a client recently, which is medical. If you think about it, is a whole industry. There's everything from dentists to manufacturers who are in medical and everything in between. And so one of the benefits of focusing on a vertical market, of course, is that you're able to differentiate your messaging and your positioning so that people who are in that industry recognize that, hey, you specialize in solving our problem, not just a generic problem. Part of the process is, what is the right altitude level of choosing the vertical market? So do you choose medical or do you choose dentists or do you choose cosmetic dentistry? And so for ballpark type of numbers, and by the way, I got this from David C. Baker, who's a positioning expert in this space. He recommends between 2,000 and 10,000 businesses. And I think the argument that he lies out, and the way I approach it is that if it's greater than 10,000 businesses in the sort of the bullseye, the center of the bullseye of your target audience, then your positioning is probably going to be too generic. It's not going to be specific enough that you're going to break through sort of the noise barrier, if you will. You think about messaging. And if you go below 2,000, well, then you have a client concentration issue where you can theoretically be really successful, but then you may risk not having enough diversity, not enough businesses to go after if you spend a lot of time in that vertical.
I guess like thinking for the stage of business that agencies are in, right? Like you've come into larger companies that weren't fully focused and have as much deep specialization. Like, is this something that really can, in an ideal world, you are doing from the beginning?
I think it's possible. Where I see businesses really succeed and thrive is when they have some kind of natural connection to the industry. So it could be that they previously were in the world of manufacturing. They've left that world. They want to start an agency. And so they're going to leverage their existing relationships and professional networks and so on and so forth. I've seen success there. I've also seen success where you have children of people in the trades. Let's say, as an example, you're a son or a daughter of people who are plumbers. You were raised in a family that had a plumbing business. And so you have a lot of natural sort of affinity for that world. You understand that world. You understand the people in that world. I've seen success there, but that is more of the exception than the rule. In that most agency owners that I've come across typically start off as that generalist, saying yes a lot, getting into business, and then go through a process where you want to find that perfect fit vertical market, of which you want to have between 2 and 10,000. But there's a couple other factors that weigh into that as well.
And so one thing that sounds obvious, but like I think goes back to they're seeing the cookies and they're now responding to your call. In the book, you talk about one, you have to give a damn about these people, which I think kind of goes back to some of these layers of like, how do you pick? Like I see people choose attorneys because they have a lot of money to spend. Your business starts to hit friction and growth. And it's like, are you that motivated to solve your own problems because you're dealing with people that you don't necessarily care about? So like you guys clearly gave a damn. And then that led into like in the book, you lead into like getting into their own mind. And like you kind of alluded to when you got on the phone with them, you were able to ask them questions that clearly were demonstrated to them that you knew their world, which obviously builds trust and so on and so forth. And so much so that you have like a whole playbook. We obviously won't be able to go through all of it, which is why everyone needs to get the book of like, how do you develop this, like, I forget what you called it, but like a voice guide.
It's a messaging and positioning one pager is ultimately what it is, which is a condensed version of who the buyer is, what the problem you're solving, what's the transformation you provide, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I love that. And like having that as a resource that I bet you 95+% of agencies that are watching this right now don't have a document like this that they can pull from. So, but why is that important?
The essence of the world we live in today in 2024 is there's no vertical market that hasn't been exploited or targeted by some, entrepreneurial upstart agency who wants to make a buck, right? And unfortunately or fortunately, our buyers, every industry is no one can escape this. Every industry is wary of being sold to by someone who approaching it from more of a transactional perspective. And so what I promote is you want to take more of that transformative approach where you want to stand out. Part of the ways that you stand out in your positioning, your messaging is that you are not only a specialist in the world of dentists, as an example, but that you have a point of view about their world. You understand that there is a big challenge that they're facing as an industry, and that part of the reason that you exist is to address that and to make the industry of dentistry or whatever that is for you and your focus a better industry. And so by extension, by working with you as a provider, as a partner, you're furthering the growth of your industry. I'll give you an example. I talk about Luke in the book. His name is Luke. There's a guy, Luke Egebrotten. He's the founder of an agency called Phaser Marketing. I don't know if you know him. He has an agency that's focused on construction businesses. His point of view and his whole approach and his reason for starting the agency in part is he understands that there is a negative stigma about working in the trades. Right? People are not entering the trades as frequently as they used to in the past. And at the same time, you have this situation where boomers and the older generation are aging out. And so there's this massive gap of jobs and opportunity in the trades. Yet there's this negative perception. And so he has recognized this as a real sort of issue in the industry. And so part of the work that he does is he has launched a scholarship where he gives scholarship money to kids who are graduating high school and going into the trades. He has a nonprofit. He raises awareness. He speaks on stages to help raise, again, the awareness and the benefits of working in the trades. Well, as a construction business looking to hire an agency, I'm more likely to want to work with Luke and his agency because he's helping me to, raise the awareness of the work that I do and to help me to, fill my company with great people and create more demand for that versus more of a transactional agency who's not really interested in the company and the industry that they're serving.
Yeah, I love that. Taking that example, like in speaking on stages, like having a nonprofit, not obviously, but some people are like, it might not make sense to do that. But having the point of view inside of the market that they're in seems really, really critical from obviously one, differentiation perspective, two, getting buy-in from like people that have the same values. Cause I'm gathering that even inside of your own vertical market that you choose, there's going to be some potential clients that maybe don't even align with your point of view. Is that safe to say?
100%. 100%. And what you're trying to do ultimately is you're building a long-term sustainable business. You want to attract the people who share the values that you have, right? And this is one of the ways that you put a signal into the market that, you're differentiated. These are the things that we believe. These are the things that we care about. And when you work with us, you're working with a company who is solving these problems.
Yeah. So we've heard the cookie strategy. Luke had all of these other avenues that obviously probably didn't directly tie to lead gen, but definitely helped in probably the getting and keeping of clients. 20 to 150, like that wasn't just a bunch of cookies, I'm guessing. So like, like, or maybe it was like, how do we kind of take, because of deep specialization, because of focus on this vertical market, because of the gifting strategy, how does that scale us?
Yeah. So we've been talking about deep specialization, and I wanted to kind of just clarify the definition of that a little bit because it's not inherently obvious. So the way that I define deep specialization, which is number one, you need to have focus on a specific vertical market, which means ultimately saying no to business that is not in that vertical market. That's number one. Number two, you have to have a strategy, which is a massive action plan that gives you a distinctive advantage. And then number three is you need to give a damn. We talked about that briefly, but you really need to have that empathy for the vertical market that you're targeting. And it's the combination, sort of the blending of all three, the focus, the strategy, and the empathy that allows you to really build that agency that has an enduring business model behind it. And so I'll talk about Scorpion, and I'll talk about specifically, in general, how people can apply this growth. So what we did at Scorpion to grow the business, here's some data of what we did. So we started off in 2015 with 20 million. We had 100 employees. In these nearly 7 years I was there, we grew from 100 employees to 1,000 employees. We grew from 1,000 customers to 14,000 customers, and we grew the revenue from 20 million to 150 million. We also grew the sales team from 6 people to 100 people. So it was a massive, massive growth during that time. So what did we do? So number one, we formalized, as I mentioned, the inbound, the outbound with the legal vertical. And so the outbound alone doubled the business, went from 20 million to 40 million just by adding outbound using this gift strategy. It became so ingrained in our process that every single one of the leads that our sales team were targeting would get a gift every single quarter. And so that meant a lot of logistics, a lot of work behind that. But it was really fruitful for us. But the real kind of hockey stick for us was taking this concept of working with an attorney and looking for an adjacent vertical market that we could concurrently, not substitute our focus on legal, but also at the same time build out another vertical and then build out another vertical and another. And that's exactly what we did. So we started with attorneys. We moved into home services, which with a primary focus on plumbing and HVAC businesses. Then we also expanded the focus to franchise or multi-location businesses. And I could talk about any of these at whatever depth. The fourth one was medical practices. So the thing that we preserved as we went through this process was we didn't have the legal sales team now selling law firms as well as HVAC technicians. We actually built a separate business unit, an entire business unit, not limited to just sales, but also customer support, full P&L around home services. I had people on my team that were dedicated to home services. We had a separate home sales team, as I mentioned, separate client services and so on and so forth. And what that allowed us to do is take what really worked from the legal vertical, which was become specialists in the home services vertical by exclusively working with them only. So as a plumber, you would talk to a salesperson who only talks to plumbers. And when you hired Scorpion, you'd work with a project manager and a client success manager who only worked with plumbers. And so you had this real sense of that we really cared, that we really understood them. And going back to the specialization, the benefit is in many cases, we were solving problems for them that they didn't even realize that they had because they were not experts in these things that related to their business growth in some cases. And so that's really the progression of the agency is we took the specialization and we went to additional verticals.
Well, it might seem obvious, but for those listening, the subtitle of the book is Escaping Founder-Led Sales. So is it simply because of the deep specialization and focus on these vertical markets that it's just easier to train someone on talking to those talking points? Or like what makes deep specialization, vertical specialization kind of the key to getting out of the sales process as a founder?
Sure. So there's three challenges that founders typically face when trying to escape sales. Number one is a lack of focus. And this is going back to being a generalist agency, being a jack of all trades, not having a concentration or an expertise in any one area. When you approach that from a sales perspective, you typically need a founder level person in there to be able to sell the value. Partially because number two, you have watered down positioning. And what I mean by that is the markets that you're selling to don't understand or they can't tell your unique value. You may be trying to tell it, but they have a hard time really understanding what makes you truly unique, right? Because you're not specialized, you're not an expert. And as a result of that, you end up competing on price and you lose deals to firms that are, lesser firms that you shouldn't be losing deals to, but you are losing deals to them because you have this watered down positioning. And then the third piece is not having any kind of pipeline growth when you're not actively building it, right? So if you're not actively trying to bring deals to the agency, there's no pipeline generation. That comes from a lack of having a good strategy to build your pipeline. And so whenever you have all three of these operating in an agency, it's virtually impossible for a founder to escape because they're just pulled back in. They have to drive the leads. They have to close the leads. And so the cure or the solution to this is to take a three-phased approach. The first phase is to find a focus, is to develop that expertise around a specific vertical market. Once you get clear on who you're serving, whether it be dentists or attorneys, could be anyone, whatever that specific vertical is, everything becomes so much easier. Like generalist agency founders when they go through this process, they're like, I know exactly who to target. I know which lists to build. I know what ads to create. I know what client success stories to write. I know what podcasts to start. I know which conferences to go to. I mean, the list goes on. So you get this focus as sort of the base of the triangle. The next level up in the pyramid, if you will, is positioning. So you want to get really clear on how do you differentiate, what's your unique value, what's your messaging, and then what's your point of view, which we talked about. And only then do you focus on the attracting piece. That's the third step, which is you have focus, you have unique positioning, and then you go into the market. You're smiling because you talk a lot about the same things, right? It's like only then you go into the market and then you're able to do things like inbound marketing, outbound marketing at a scale that is, I call it high yield. And you're right. Ultimately, once you have these three steps in place, then you have a system where the founder can begin to step away because it's much more process driven. You could bring up someone within the organization to take over sales. You could hire an external vertical specialist from another agency to come in and sell for you. I've seen both be very successful.
So all of this, which as you joked about it, I obviously agree with all this stuff. What would you say to the person who and maybe this person doesn't exist, but I have to feel like they kind of do, that hears this and they're like, well, I don't have time for that. Or that seems like it's going to take a long time to get to the being able to run ads or the be able to do the outbound strategies. Maybe it's just the ADHD world that we live in, but the things that we're talking about, I just time and time again, it takes time, dedication, commitment, staying the course, which for a lot of people today, and I see smaller agencies, they just can't weather that, the developing of the deep expertise for that vertical. What words of wisdom would you share to those people, or what would you say to those folks?
So I would say that this is part of the reason why I wrote the book, because I wanted to create a roadmap that was easy to understand, easy to follow. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get instant gratification, but at least it takes out the uncertainty for how to get there, right? That's number one. Number two is that in my experience, that what I teach and what I believe based on all of the work that I do in my professional career is that specialization, specifically in a vertical market, is truly the shortest path to building scale in your agency. Sure, there's other stories of people who've done it other ways, but this is a tried and true path. And so you could do it the slow way and struggle through this, or you could get committed to becoming a specialist in a vertical market. And hopefully the book and the roadmap that I've laid out is going to be helpful in your ability to short circuit that process.
I love it. And I can definitely, it's the scripts guys, grab the book. You don't have to be doing 20 million or even 5 million to benefit from this at all. The scripts, the templates, the frameworks, the tools that come along with the book, if you download them, like, are super simple to apply in your business right now, that will start helping you move down the path of like speaking to the point of view, developing those things, picking your market. If you're watching this channel and you've been following along for a while, you probably are at least convinced or bought into the concept of focusing on one type of client with one type of outcome. And there's a total executable playbook here in this book. Anyone, Not Everyone. Where can they get the book, Corey?
So I was lucky enough to grab the domain anyonenoteveryone.com. And on that page, you'll be able to, for your listeners, Greg, they'll be able to go to that page and actually listen to the audiobook today. So if you go to that domain, the website, anyonenoteveryone.com, you can actually start listening to the book immediately.
I love it. So guys, go check that out. And where else can we find more about you and learn more about what you do?
So my website is at CoreyQuinn.com, CoreyQuinn.com. I have a daily newsletter that talks about all the things specialization and taking a vertical focus, deep specialization. So I encourage you to sign up for that, and you can find that on my website.
I love it, guys. Check out the description below. We have all the links to those things. Grab a copy of the book, start specializing. Your business will thank you for it down the road for sure. Corey, thanks so much for spending your time with us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it.